Greetings to the Chef community. Thanks for joining us. My name's John Weiss. I lead product at Chef, and I'm really grateful that you joined us here today to learn about our next generation compliance software. We've been really busy, hard at work, listening to a lot of your feedback and a lot of ideas that have come from the Chef community on how we can make our compliance capabilities more powerful for you to achieve your outcomes. Today, we're really pleased to introduce you to some of the team that works on this, and we're going to be hopping around the globe talking to all the folks who are working on your behalf to create a great new offer for you. So with that, let's go into the first section, which is going to be an overview from Keka. Keka used to be a customer in DevOps, and so he's here as a product manager here at Chef, helping us build the offer. So Keka, tell us about what's in the next generation compliance solution from Chef.
Hey there, John. Yeah, thank you so much for kicking this off. And yeah, I'm glad to be talking to you folks today and going to be telling you about some of our offerings and what's going on. And I kind of, to lead off, I want to kind of talk to you all about kind of like the challenge, like where's the space that we're working in right now. So if we go ahead and take a look into that, right? So basically the challenge that we're working with to kind of level set so everybody understands is that, in a word, security is hard, right? It's hard for a couple of reasons. Number one is because it's non-negotiable, right? Like, especially in this world that we live in today with GDPR, you know, and privacy being a really big concern, like security is super huge. It's like, it's very important for every one of us. And so, but the other side of it that's also hard is that, okay, but implementing those things is also something that at times can actually impede the ability to deliver because you're adding like roadblocks into there, right? And so the way we kind of see this happen is that typically security reviews usually happen at the ending of a development lifecycle process. So if you think about your development lifecycle of, you build something in dev and then it goes into QA and stage and then into production. Typically the security review process happens just before it goes to production. And that's a long process for any type of iteration that has to be done to get pushed back into the development lifecycle after that. And so you can have a lot of issues where that will impede progress there. And also, if you think about it, it also adds timing there for any of the stakeholders involved with doing any of the remediation and the investigation stuff that takes away from the other high value work that they've got going on with their organization, right? Because as we all know, we're not hired as an audit specific function for our companies, right? We are actually hired for very specific business value pieces, but we get looped into audit processes as a part of our job because it's a part of everyday work, right? And then, so when you have these different stakeholders going about helping in these different areas, oftentimes there's limited visibility there and also limited collaboration. You kind of hear the term throwing things over the fence. That's a very common thing that happens there. And so that creates a whole bunch of undue risk, right? And from like a survey that we kind of had seen from customers, right, or just talking about the industry in general, is like 81% of IT professionals say that they believe InfoSec policies inhibit their agility and speed. But what's even more telling is that among the InfoSec professionals themselves, like 77% of them are saying they believe that their stuff actually impedes agility and speed as well. So it's like an understood thing, but does it need to be acceptable? Not so sure, right? But let's dive a little bit deeper into this though, right? So if we go ahead and take a look at the current state of information security, right? So as technology has evolved over time, right, we've got velocity gains that we've seen inside of the development lifecycle, right? But InfoSec seems to be lagging behind in those areas, right? And it's the data kind of pans it out, right? 56% of breaches took months or longer to discover. What's interesting is that since 2014, like more than 90% of exploits have been observed using only 9 known vulnerabilities, like 9, like single digit, count on your hand stuff is basically making up 90% of the issues that have come out from 6 years ago, right? And then sporadic audits don't really help solve the problem either, right? Because as we kind of found out from a survey, another survey we conducted, like, it could take companies 2 months to complete a security audit. And so it's no wonder when you hear about these cultural issues of when you even bring up the words audit with folks, they just start dreading their life for like the next however long, because they know it's going to take a long time, and 73% of companies release vulnerabilities at least once a year, and whether that's a known factor or not, the point is that everyone, this is par for the course, right? But it doesn't have to be acceptable, right? And so
Keka, can we automate this and make it like continuous remediation? Is that within our grasp now?
That's absolutely kind of what we're trying to gear ourselves here for, John. So yeah, totally. As basically as the demand increases for getting speed to delivery, we also want to say this is our opportunity to get in there to add that same automation and speed into the security and compliance space to help address those issues for our customers. So I want to kind of take this point to kind of jump into a framework for you all to understand when we think about continuous compliance. This is kind of like the way it kind of looks here, right? So the way it kind of looks to us here is that you have a baseline that you define, and you pick a certain benchmark, whatever it is that's there. We work with the Centers for Internet Security, so you got benchmarks across all the different operating systems. With Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Debian, Microsoft Windows, you name it, it's there. But you have to define a baseline. You run that on your system, and ideally, if you're in a compliant state, great, you're good to go. But life doesn't always happen like that. So when you hit a state where you're not compliant, whatever certain tests that are failing, you ideally want to be able to remediate those things right away. And if you're not able to remediate those things right away, that's kind of what, for whatever reason, maybe a business continuity things, organizational policies, such that it may take you 30, 60 days to address, maybe even a quarter in some cases. Then you're able to apply for what we're calling a waiver, and it's basically an exception. And you could put any of those detailed pieces of information in there, get it approved by your leadership, and get that basically updated into your baseline. And so you basically work this flow and walk through it on a constant basis. And when we say constant, we're saying you should be able to do that honestly on an hourly basis, maybe even more than that. Like there's no reason why you can't know the compliance state of your fleet at any given time, right? And again, we didn't invent a lot of this stuff. Like we've talked to our customers about this, and we've heard about this from the field. So this is definitely, every time I've shown this to folks, I've always seen head nods, which is a really great sign. So now how does Chef do this, right? How do we take this approach of continuous compliance, and how do we see doing that? And what we see is, okay, well, let's take those stakeholders. Let's take development with their application code. Let's take the security teams with their audit policies, and even the audit results that they have that they then give to operations to go through the remediation process, and actually incorporate that into a single, what we're calling a workload artifact. And building that artifact, pushing that through a pipeline, a continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline into a trusted artifact store, right? And from there, it's basically a hermetically sealed box from which your actual fleet will actually pull their definitions from. So I am using this business value A, I go to that artifact store, say, give me that definition, I load that up and I go. And the beauty of it is we do all of this from what we're calling a human-free zone, right? So one of the biggest variables inside of your operations environments, inside of your InfoSec world, is basically humans. And so if we can reduce that load, reduce that churn, that's kind of how we're kind of going about looking at it, right? So going from there now, how can Chef take that and kind of piecemeal deliver that in a couple forms of value for our customers, right? Like actual marketable value that you can get, right? And so the way we see it is in one facet is we want to be able to give you observability, right? We want to be able to allow you to audit your fleet, right? Know what's going on. And so that's one of the offerings for Chef Compliance that we're coming out with today, is that Chef Compliance audit offering will allow you to be able to take a look at your fleet, scanning any of the CIS certified curated content that we've kind of built, because we built out a bunch of profiles from the CIS benchmarks. And we own those, we curate those. So any updates that happen to those things, we're standing behind those. You have a secure chain of custody as a customer of those things, and you're able to just use that and implement that on your fleet to identify areas of non-compliance, right? Now, that's one piece of the puzzle, right? The other piece, though, is doing the remediation aspects of those things. So you found out that you're not compliant on certain controls. Great. Well, if you're one type of enterprise that is like super deep practitioner, got a lot of focus, got a lot of manpower behind it, you're probably really strong-armed in the way of being able to like really quickly create some remediation against any of those things that you're not compliant with. And that's great. That is awesome. And we provide you the ways to be able to do that through our product suite as well, right? But now as we kind of evolve that story toward enterprises that either don't have that type of manpower or have focuses in other areas, we wanted to be able to provide those folks a lift. And that's where we kind of introduced the continuous remediation content and our solution for that with the second option, with the Chef Compliance remediation offering. So we now add the remediation content into that as well. And we do that again in a form of the single artifact that you're able to push to your fleet, and so that you're able to be constantly remediated, and you have a single source of truth to work from, which streamlines the audit process. So what does that get you, right? So that gets you that phase that I was telling you about earlier, going from dev, QA, staging, production, and the whole security review process being in there. It now actually streamlines it where you're actually having that available to you at every single phase of the development lifecycle. So now you're able to actually do continuous compliance at every phase, from dev to QA staging, all the way through. By the time you get to production, it's nothing more than a formality. And all of that stuff is backed by our CIS certified chef curated content that kind of is the foundation of all of that, right? So this is a really great story. This is a really great way for us to kind of help y'all get to a state of compliance. And that's really what the point of this whole thing was, right? The whole point of this thing was to go from 0 to compliant in minutes. And so that's where we're at, and that's the journey of where we're going. So
that's really powerful. Thanks, Keka. And I'd like to remind anybody who's watching us, please feel free to engage with us in the chat. We're all going to be here for you and some of our extended team members to answer any of your questions, technical or otherwise. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. I'd like to jump over to Ireland. Rachel Rice is an engineer from our Belfast Engineering Hub. And Rachel, are you able to share with us, like, what's actually involved in creating some of this certified content for both scanning and remediation? Because that comes out of your facility there.
Yeah, that's a great question, John. There's actually quite a lot of work that goes into creating the compliance or remediation content. To start off, when we're making the compliance content, we'll start by translating the SCAP benchmarks that we get from CIS into InSpec code. Then this code obviously needs carefully reviewed, and at that point we may find that we need to add a few additional InSpec controls, and if that's the case, we'll build those out. So that's the compliance piece. And then for the remediation, we'll develop the remediation content based on the CIS recommendations. And once we have those parts finished, all of that will get sent over to CIS, hopefully get their approval. At this point, there might be a little bit of back and forth between CIS and ourselves. And then once they're happy, the content will get the certification, and that's it.
That's great. So if I'm a customer, I know that not only is this content tested and certified by Chef, but upstream, you've actually worked with the CIS authorities to get their certification as well, that this represents best practices for securing an endpoint, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Wonderful.
Well, thanks for that and everything you're doing to produce a great content pipeline. Let's go over to Galen Emery. Galen is our lead security and compliance architect. And Galen, if we can take a step back here, what trends have you been seeing in terms of really bridging that divide that structurally is between the infrastructure operations and app delivery teams and the information security folks that are setting policy in enterprise?
Yeah, John, thanks for the question. It's a really important thing, and we've been saying the words as code for years now here at Chef. You know, starting with infrastructure as code, leading into DevOps, and now leading into DevSecOps and compliance and security as code. And this is really just a continuation of that idea of building the policy-driven approach rather than trying to take all the data from compliance and security scanners and then make a decision on what is and is not compliant. We're using the ability of InSpec and Chef Compliance to define the policy up front, run that specifically against the systems, and have that be a true state of the fleet in terms of their compliance and security dashboard.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know I've talked to customers as well who have information security policies given to them in PDF documents or wikis or whatnot, and then they have to translate those into, write cookbooks. And so does this cut that down?
Yeah, absolutely. Those policies typically fall back to the CIS benchmarks that Rachel just mentioned. And what we can provide and what we do provide is that true chain of custody of that content all the way back to CIS. And that's a really key component of the security and compliance side, is making sure we know where things came from, how they got there, that we have an integrity check to all of it. And all of that's built into how we build our software.
Nice, thanks. Well, I think that I want to see and show everybody how this really works. So let's go over to Florida. Mr. John Snow. We jokingly call him the King of the North for obvious reasons, but you've been working hard on this. You're one of our top engineers. Could you give us a tour of, let us see this? It sounds really good. Let's check it. Let's check
totally.
it out.
So one of the things that I want to talk about is a little bit about what we're about to see in the demo. So we're going to see both the compliance content that Rachel talked about, as well as the remediation content that the Belfast team has built. And so what I want to start with is to show a little bit of automate and what we have here. So I right now have an Automate server that I have built, and then I have a CentOS node. And we can see that like I'm filling a couple of controls. This is a CentOS node that has some stuff on it, but I'm filling some controls. And what I really want to do is I want to do some skips. There's some stuff in here that I'm pretty confident this is a demo environment. So I don't really think that I need to be setting no exec on my var temp. So Galen, are you cool with me, like as a security person, like skipping some of this stuff?
Yeah, John. I mean, I recognize that this is our, development systems, QA systems, and that this all mounted to the same partition here. So we can go ahead and skip all those kind of no exec, all those mount point particular controls you've got there. Go ahead and make that happen.
Yeah, sweet. So so making that happen is actually really simple. I have here a file. So we started with a plan. This plan basically specifies the scan package as well as the remediation package that I want to use. And then like I have this YAML file here that talks about what benchmark it is that I'm using. And then I just specify the things that I want to do. So I have some skips in here. I actually have a couple of like commands that like some of our remediation we want to be a little more careful with. And so, and then I have just some remediation. So all I need to do now is build this and upload it to my depot.
So John, you mentioned that, we've got a bunch of this content and, we're obviously working with the CentOS system. What else do we have from a content perspective that we can work with here? Do we have like Red Hat? CentOS is great for development, but, we obviously pay for Red Hat in production.
Yeah, that's a total great question. So let's take a look here. So yeah, I'm pretty confident that we have Red Hat. Yeah, sure enough, we have Red Hat 8 down here, and both level 1 and level 2.
That's pretty awesome. All right, I'll give you another softball. What about Ubuntu and Debian systems? So let's stick with Ubuntu.
Yeah, we have Ubuntu. Yeah, we have Ubuntu, and we have Ubuntu both 12 all the way through 1804.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's get a little bit more complex here. What about Docker?
You know what? Sure enough, we have a Docker profile as well. Like, and we've been working on the Docker remediation to make it so that your Docker environment is secure.
Okay.
And I know you're probably going to ask me a couple of things, but like one of the things that I definitely want to highlight is we are the first provider certified by CIS for all 3 clouds. So that's AWS, Azure, and Google.
All right, let's take a look at that Azure profile.
Totally. Yep. And there we have that Azure benchmark, and we can quickly click into it and see some of the control sets and see like how that stuff is set up.
So just to make sure I understand what this is doing, John, this is not just looking at just a system in Azure. It's looking at my actual Azure controls around like user access management, around network rules, all that kind of stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. This is this one specifically you can see here is using the AD user and actually looking for a guest account and making sure that there isn't a guest account inside of your Azure AD.
Awesome. John, I think we might have killed enough time. Do you think the report's done yet?
Well, let's see. Go click on the node. Let it refresh, and sure enough, it is. There's this one here though that I have that I wasn't really sure about. I mean, if we click in and expand a little bit, like you can see that this is a little bit more of a complex control. It's actually wanting to do this allow users and deny users group for SSH. And I just wasn't sure, like, this is a test system. Like, Galen, what do you think we should be using for SSH?
Well, John, I mean, you're right. This is a pretty complicated control that we're working with here, but it's obvious that you know nothing because we actually don't use SSH in our environment. So we can remove this control entirely by proving that we're not using SSH on this system.
You're totally right. I totally forgot about this profile here that like shows that like we aren't even using SSH on this system. So like, yeah, you're right. So I'm just going to go ahead and skip that. That should be pretty simple to skip. Just give me one. Like all we should have to do now is like, just like I did before, we just have to basically like specify the scan, set it to false, and then the justification for why we don't want to scan it. And I'm just going to replace this whole file. And the nice thing is that like now that that's done, we can totally see that, and I should just be able to rebuild. So while that's building, Galen, like, I'm still kind of like, I understand the need for not having SSH, but like, how about we talk a little bit more about like why that is and like what it is why I don't need SSH on my systems anymore.
Yeah, so as Keka started talking about earlier, right, we have the ability to create an artifact that is the entirety of the policy we want to follow, right? So that security policy is written in the inspect, we have the remediation policy as well. Together, combined, it's what you're actually creating and uploading right now, right? It's that workload artifact. We can put this into a pipeline. Obviously, today we're just putting this directly to an artifact store, but we can definitely put this through, your CI/CD systems. And the whole point here is that your systems pull from an artifact store. We have the concept of channels, so we can make sure we don't roll an update accidentally to a system before it's ready. But this allows us to make sure that the systems in question, our production systems, do not have inbound access rules. They talk directly to an artifact store, which pulls from the pipeline, which gets its artifact from source code. Again, chain of custody, being able to attest to the security and the integrity of this artifact as we go through the whole process is really critical. And so as a result, we don't use SSH to manage the systems. As we can see, we're making changes very rapidly without even the use of it.
Yeah, it's super awesome. And one of the things that I want to highlight is we do have like a bunch of profiles, and we also have some remediation content. I just want to talk about some of that. This is kind of some of the content that we've been working on. But I think we've killed enough time. So let's go see if that change actually came through. So we'll just click refresh real quick, and sure enough, we have a fully compliant node. And what we can do is we can actually click on the wave controls, and we can scroll down here, and we can see not only the wave controls that I did on the first scan, but here's that control that I have waved, and we can see there's that reason because we don't use SSH. So.
Well, there we have it. John, I think that we just showed in about 5 or 6 minutes that we can make a couple sets of changes to systems and have at the end of it a fully compliant system to our specific organizational controls.
Yeah, totally.
It was nice you demonstrated that you could provide waivers on a policy-driven basis as well to certain node types that should not fall under those kind of requirements, right? So let's travel over to Australia and meet Anthony Rees. Anthony's a solutions architect, and I know, Anthony, you've got some customers you've been working with to deploy this kind of technology, and I want to learn about and share what are some of the results that they have seen. I hear you have one case where you've got a customer that's using a very traditional, like sort of Windows and VMware environment. Can we learn about that one first?
Absolutely, thanks, John. So the Asia Pacific team work with a lot of different companies, actually very highly regulated companies within this region. And this particular customer that we work with in New Zealand are not only highly regulated, but they're actually regulated by the Prudential regulator across New Zealand and also Australia in this particular use case. Now, the customer is very focused on Windows, and they're also based primarily on-prem, but they do have a little bit of cloud. Now, they use the Chef Inspec and Chef Compliance scans for Windows 2016 and Windows 2019. And they also use hardening as well using Chef cookbooks. And that's very important to them because that allows them to be able to maintain a hardened premise for both their Windows 2019 and 2019 and 2016 systems, but also allows them to reduce the drift across that system as well. And they've been a customer of ours for quite some time now.
Great, so they're seeing good results with hardening all of those assets through a policy-based approach with Chef. Do you have, I understand you have an example of a customer that's actually more of a multi-cloud pattern, and tell us about how that's working out.
Absolutely, John. So the second customer that I want to talk about are an Australian-based business-to-business online travel payments service. Now, this particular customer is 100% digital online, and they're also using 2 different cloud technologies based out of Australia. Now, they need to be able to prove to the government authorities that they are security and audit hardened. And to be able to do that, they're using InSpec compliance to be able to create reporting systems so that they can report back to the government authorities. And they're also using a number of chefs out of the box hardening cookbooks to ensure that their systems on the cloud meet those regulatory authority and the money handling required for them to be able to prove that compliance across their systems.
Right. Sounds essential to the custodian responsibilities around governing this business, right? I mean, you got to not only meet your internal requirements, be able to prove to the external authorities that you've got your act together, right? So thanks for everything you're doing down there. Let's zip all the way over to the United Kingdom and meet Anna Aflail from London. And I know you've been working with a customer with really high security expectations and compliance obligations in a very regulated space. And tell us about what problems that this customer was trying to solve.
Yeah, very happy to. Thank you, John. So I think quite an interesting client here that we actually engaged with for the first time about 2.5 years ago. It's a client that was really challenged meeting audit requirements, which in the end made compliance and security of their machines a top priority, and this really at the highest level in the bank. In parallel, they had started their journey to the Azure cloud and did not want to miss the opportunity really to make the compute resources secure by design, and then use automation to ensure that they actually remain secure as well. Great thing is that CIS was already a chosen standard for them, and they were successfully scanning it at the level they needed to, but actually using a separate tool, a different tool. And the challenge they had obviously is that this tool only did the scanning and all of the remediation they needed to do manually, right? And so the challenge they found themselves in is it costs a lot actually, you know, to maintain those tools, manual remediation. It was really a best effort basis because they had a really hard time telling their auditors in which state they're in, right? It was really a big challenge. So what was quite interesting for them is that they could have really a single tool from a vendor, a solution where they could really minimize the cost of authoring the content, but also have a consistent approach really for both the audit and then the automated scanning afterwards. I think what stood out for me as part of the post-sales customer success engagement team was really the approach that they took with us, really partnering up from day one on the highest level. We insisted that we actually go on site, not just with the pre-sales organization, but also the engineering organization, and made sure that both organizations, chef and the client, were connected from day one and able to make the right decisions at the right time. And that included then for Chef to build the 24 new CIS remediation cookbooks and compliance profiles. So DCA being implemented really. I guess one of the favorite things from an exchange this week with the program manager was that he said to me, Anna, we're on that journey now for significant time. We already thought there was a lot of engagement before we actually signed the deal, and then it died down. But no, actually, you guys doubled and tripled the engagement, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's a key part of the message, because we're all very grateful. We have customer success folks and professional service folks who can help customers really understand the pain points and solve their problems, right? So thank you for everything you're doing there and for sharing that story with us. I'm glad it's going so well at that scale, and thanks for that. So in conclusion, we're just out of time. We have so much more we could share with you, but check out the breakout sessions if you're able to. We have customers who are presenting two really interesting sessions. One, Show Me the Compliance, and the other one is Moving Security, Shifting Left in the application release lifecycle. We also have a webinar coming up you can check out, and see our live stream on Twitch which talks about compliance as well. The links are here. Thanks for joining us very much. We appreciate your time. Thanks for being customers and allowing us to serve you and continue to innovate. We look forward to continue to work with you as we go forward with this capability. Good day.